Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Should be a really fun and exciting one. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes as folks are trickling in. But when we do get started, we're going to talk about the sales velocity equation, what we can do from an AI perspective, and really how to make revenue growth and revenue generation much more predictable. As we all know, AI is the topic of the conversation and many things, and sales is no different. So really excited to share some insights and some things we're seeing in the market. With all that said, a couple of housekeeping items. We do want this to be engaging. Please use the chat function to drop your questions, your thoughts, your comments. We'll try to engage and get your perspectives. We also have some questions for you as we go through this. Don't be shy. We certainly won't be as we go through this. And yeah, we'll get started here in just another minute. All right, we're at 2:03 Central, so yeah, I think we can go and get started. I'll hand it over to Ricardo and Carmen. Over to you guys.
Cool. Thanks, Quang.
Thanks so much, Quang. All right, Carmen, you want to kick us off, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I will kick us off. So my name is Carmen Olmetti. I appreciate you folks joining today. We're here to talk about sales velocity and really specifically how we can drive revenue using those four levers of the sales velocity equation. So we'll talk about a little bit about pipeline, which is one of the four. The other three will be really the main focus, specifically your win rate, the average deal size, and then the speed. And so the way that this webinar is structured is meant to be sort of a bit more holistic and integrated. And what we mean by that is there's certainly a strategic side of this, there's an operational and process side of it, but then there's also the technology side of it. And so what we'll do is we'll try to keep it more interactive, where I'll talk about a little bit of the strategy, a little bit of the operations, and then Ricardo will talk about the technology side, specifically Knode, and how that could be a tool, how that is a tool that managers can use with reps to drive those conversations with real-time insights so that you can improve win rate, you can drive larger deal size, and you can close deals faster. So hopefully it's a bit interactive. We try to make these more about engaging with the audience as opposed to us talking for 60 minutes. So with that, we do have a chat, as Quang mentioned. Feel free to add questions, comments. We'll pause throughout and get to them. And then, of course, we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for any comments or questions that you all have.
Great.
Okay, well, we can go. I just gave a little bit about myself. I'm from RevEng Consulting. We are a strategy and execution consulting firm. We sit in the kind of go-to-market, sales compensation, AI, RevOps space. And so we work with a number of clients all the way from kind of maybe a early day startup to Fortune 10 companies on anything and anything that's go-to-market related, compensation related, pay transparency for those that are in the EMEA market is a big part of what we do. And our focus is really on execution. So understanding strategy and current state and all that is really good, but we want our clients to see results. And so that means sometimes we embed ourselves into projects. It means that we're there through implementation. That is really our philosophy. And doing so, we work with a number of providers and a number of software companies that allow for that go-to-market motion to exist on the tech side, and Knode is one of them. So I'm happy to be here with Ricardo representing the Knode team, and I'll turn it to you for a quick intro.
Great. So yeah, we have the obligatory about Knode.ai. So just very quickly, in terms of what we do, first off, hey everybody, I'm Ricky, co-founder and CEO of Knode. At Knode, we do one thing, which is drive revenue through seller behavior change. This is really how we structure our software. We're focused on delivering outcomes, and that really takes three components. The first one is decoding the winning behaviors. So this is discovering what actually works for your specific sales team using a historical cohort analysis. Then we take that and we use the rubrics that we create from that for quantitative performance tracking. So being able to say, hey, Carm, on 15 of 20 calls this week, you didn't do this particular behavior, or you should have done that behavior. And then lastly, we turn that into AI-driven coaching plans that actually drive that seller behavior change. The goal for us is to make every single one of our customers have a scalable selling process that drives incremental top line through faster deal cycles, improved win rates, and higher pricing. So that's we'll talk through some of those things today, but it's a pleasure to have you all here. Carm, over to you.
Great. All right. So we're going to talk about sales velocity equation. I mentioned it briefly. I imagine those on the call are familiar with it. The idea is that if any one of these four levers you can improve, you will make more money. More revenue will flow in. So if you have the same win rate, the same deal size, the same cycle time, but you have more deals in the pipeline, you will make more revenue. Likewise, if you have the same number of deals, but a better win rate and the same deal size and the same cycle time, you will make more revenue. The idea is to, of course, improve all four of those. In practice, sometimes it's not so easy to do it. As an example, a lot of times if we work with enterprise clients, they have a government, vertical, probably not going to have much influence over cycle time. Probably not going to be able to, move that needle too much. But you could potentially improve the number of deals in the pipeline. You could potentially improve win rate, or even deal size, depending on the product or the service that you're offering. So that is the basis of this webinar, is looking at each of these four and saying, what can we do from a sort of strategy perspective, and then an operational perspective, and then as Ricky will kind of get into the details, what can we do from a kind of technology and software perspective. All right, I talked about this slide. We have it here because it's sort of the natural flow of things, but again, strategic, operational, and then the systems and the AI side. I think as Ricky did in his obligatory about Knode, stressing the AI nature of it. I do want to say one thing about it. I feel like AI is a bit of a buzzword. It's something that's been around for a long time, and over in the last probably 24 months has taken off. I think it's used probably a bit more loosely than the reality would suggest. But I do think we are very much a believer in leveraging AI. But going back to the operational side of it, the process side, we're already seeing both in the academic literature, the journal literature, and even in our own experience, that everyone wants to use AI. The use case is pretty clear. Could do things that humans can't do in terms of speed and comprehensiveness. But these initiatives, these enablement, they're failing, and they're failing because we're just saying, okay, a tool exists, let's embed it into our ecosystem, but not factor in the human side of things, the cultural side of things, not really having a kind of cohesive strategy, whether it's for your data architecture or for your use cases in terms of your sales force. And then the operational side of it, it is expensive, it is costly to build this stuff natively, right? So as I'm sure, Ricardo, you'll get into, whenever you're looking at technology, kind of have a few choices, right? You can build it, you can borrow it, you can buy it. Oftentimes we find that buying it, especially for niche or more kind of case specific software, buying it tends to be the better play, and then overlaying it to your tech stack. So just wanted to call out the AI side of it. It is something that we don't use loosely. It is something that is very much purpose built and part of the fabric in which we present this to you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically at Knode, what we recommend for our customers is you always want to pick a metric before you are purchasing an AI system, and a specific metric that you want that AI to improve. If you can get very crisp on the goals you're trying to drive with it, it tends to lead to much better operational outcomes. It's a basic part of the process, but it's something that we see many boards, many leadership teams miss if they're just thinking about this, hey, let's just implement AI for the sake of AI. So when you have those goals, the software all of a sudden becomes much clearer in terms of the capabilities you need and how you can implement it. That's something we always recommend and ask our clients to do before we engage.
Yep. So I'm not going to spend. This one is the one of three where we won't spend too much time on. Typically, this is a kind of a marketing function. It could be it depends if you have an outbound function or you run a BDR or an SDR type of team. This is obviously very, very applicable. I think the thing that we would want to stress on the pipeline side of things is that you can optimize for pipeline by having more deals come in. If that's truly your North Star on what it means to have deals in the pipeline, the thing that we would stress is that the strategic alignment, the operational excellence is really making sure that you have a pretty tight ICP, so ideal customer profile. Marketing will tend to own that, or at least have a very big say in it, specifically if it's an inbound motion. But the reason being is that even with the best technology and the best AI, cutting edge and all that, whether it's Knode or someone else, if you don't have the right deals coming in, there's not necessarily going to be a lot of movement that you can change on any of these other levers. So Knode is going to give you those insights to help drive those behaviors, to help correct, maybe behaviors that are not as, conducive to selling, and to enhance and amplify those behaviors that are. But if the deals coming in are either too broadly related to your ICP, don't necessarily fit their kind of immediate needs or their use case, there's not really a lot of movement that you can make. So you end up, I hate the term, but you end up spinning your wheels, so to speak, on these other levers, when really it's a sort of foundational upfront issue of the deals that are coming in. And so technology can enable this in a number of ways. Obviously, having really good lead scoring, MQL scoring. Oftentimes we see with compensation plans with BDRs or SDRs, they're not necessarily paid on quantifying or qualifying the deals, or the leads rather, in a way that would set up reps for success. So really the call out here is just making sure that the deals that are coming in fit against an ICP. If you have an outbound motion or even an inbound motion with BDRs, that you have very clear qualification criteria. You don't want to have it too in the weeds. You don't want to have it too high level, because if you can set yourself up for success here, all of the movement and all of the changes you make on, win rate and deal size and speed will be then not only that much easier to make, but you'll be able to make headway across all three of those. All right, conversion rate. This is where the fun gets started. I'm not going to go too much into detail here. I think Ricardo, I want to save it for you. But really, with conversion rate, what we're talking about is just simply the win rate. Now, you can look at win rate, and you should, and you probably do, at a region level, at a vertical level, at a segment level, at a role level. There's so many ways you can slice and dice it. I think the reality is, though, it comes down to a few things. We have a client today I was just looking at data for, and their hypothesis was the country that the lead originates in is all that matters. I looked at the data, I ran the stats and did all the fancy stuff. The country explained 1.2% of the variance in win rate. And so it is important when you're using this technology to make sure you understand the underlying drivers of what's causing something to break versus what's something that can amplify and enhance. And so that's where the sort of strategic alignment comes in. The operational excellence, the one thing I want to say around this is that, we work with a lot of sales orgs. I myself have worked in enterprise settings as an operator, as a corporate employee. And it's great if you have a culture that rewards, results. It's great that you have compensation plans that reward it. But if you don't have the infrastructure in terms of the dashboards, the analytics, the insights, that's going to be an impediment, number one. But more importantly, the importance of the first line manager, I don't think I can stress it enough. That role is so critical to making sure that you're driving execution, those initiatives, So when you define what operational excellence is and what it looks like, and you define how reps show up and what they do to make sure that they can have the highest conversion rate possible, that needs to be reinforced at the first line manager level. And if they don't have the insights, or they're not trained, or they don't have the dashboards, they don't have the data to be able to have an objective conversation to say, this is how we expect our reps to show up. This is what best in class looks like. Those conversations can't be had, right? And so all the best technology in the world isn't going to help you unless you have those insights. And that's really what Ricardo's here to highlight today. So I don't want to steal any more thunder from him. This is where it gets a bit more interactive. So I'm going to turn it to you.
Yeah. So thanks, Carmen. I think, you really hit the nail on the head in terms of focusing on those frontline managers and how they're having their sellers show up. So of course, every sales org that we work with or that I've seen has some type of process, right? They have some type of behavioral rubric that they want their sellers to be executing with customers. And so as we talked about here, you have to design that process well, have a good qualification framework, review those deals, et cetera. But the common gap, and this is where we see a lot of organizations struggling, is actually how do I scale that coaching in a way that my entire org can get it? It's data driven and it doesn't take a ton of time. And so when it comes to Knode, that is really, what we are focused on is driving that revenue through seller behavior change to make sure they're following the process that you want. And, by the way, if there are some slides to take pictures of, I would say some of these conversion rate behaviors may be the most important. So as you think about this, when we typically walk into an org, the problem they state is, hey, I'm spending all this time on enablement, I'm spending all this time on training, but really not much of it is actually working in a way that I can measure the improvements, right? If I take an individual seller that's performing at a C level or a B level, and I'm trying to get them to behave like a seller that's performing at an A level, I don't know if that's actually happening without, for example, reviewing calls, listening to historical calls, spending many hours per week trying to do it, having SKOs and sales training at the start of the year. And all of those things are super valuable, but getting quantitative data around this is something that is a net new use case that AI can provide to every sales org. And by the way, whether that's with Knode or any other tool that is out there, you now have the ability to turn the unstructured data set that is conversational intelligence, customer interactions. You can take all of that and put discrete structures around it that actually let you generate quantitative stats that make a huge impact for your org. So the analogy I like to use is current state of the world in terms of visibility into customer conversations for managers. It's like practicing all week to prepare your team for the big game. And then the game happens on Sunday. And you, as the coach and the general manager, you can see the first series and the score at the end. You don't get any of the stats in between. You don't know who scored, how many yards there were, what the completion percentage was. You don't have any of those stats readily available for you, right? And so you have to come back the next week then and prepare with that limited visibility. That's where AI can really help. And in terms of the behaviors where we are seeing folks in particular driving increased win rates and increased conversion rates, it has to do with these two things. One is identifying, quantifying the core business pain of the customer. And the second one is building a negative impact case when your sellers are talking to them. Now, I know we have, message board and Q&A here. How many folks are actively training on getting their sellers to identify and quantify the core business pain for the customer, as well as building a negative impact case? And I'll pause for a second to let some messages come in, but we'll keep going depending on how many more.
Hey, Ricardo, quick question. The negative impact case, we don't see that a lot. I'm just wondering, can you maybe walk through just high level what that looks like in practice, or just give an example?
Absolutely. So when we think about these questions, and again, these questions are really some of the the areas where we always like to focus. So when we talk about identify and quantify the core business pain, a question I love to ask is, hey, Quang, what are your top business priorities over the next 3 to 6 months? Oh, okay, great. So, and that's for you personally. Those are the things you have to get done. Awesome. Okay. So if that's what you have to get done, what about the broader business is really kind of causing that to be a priority there? And if that's causing it, how do you actually get how do you actually get to the metric that defines if you've succeeded in solving that, or if that goes well or poorly? Like, can we really talk about a metric? Okay, great. Who owns this metric? And by the way, that metric could be everything from, conversion rates to improved lead generation to, number of orders to reduce cycle times for our customer. I mean, pick whichever metric aligns to your value prop, and then get the customer talking about that and get them quantifying it. We'll show what that looks like in a second. And then once you've quantified that metric, right, once you really have a good sense of what that is, then you build a negative impact case by pressing on that metric and saying, okay, so let's say now that, Carmen, let's say you didn't solve this issue with this metric over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. What would the impact on the business be? What would the impact be for you personally? Typically, our customers worry about this particular problem as a consequence of not improving their win rate over the course of the next 6 months. Is that something that your team is focused on or your leadership team is talking about? So you're starting by getting to a quantified pain metric, and then you are building the negative impact case off of that to increase the consequences of not solving it. Now, this is a great way to drive conversions, because if you are speaking the same language as the customer, they are going to appreciate that and want your help in solving that problem. It also drives urgency, which we will talk about which we will talk about a little bit later. But again, conversion rate, the two big things that we see: identify and quantify the core business pain and building a negative impact case. Those are some of the behaviors. Now, I'm gonna hop out of this for a second, hop out of the deck and show you guys what this looks like and how you can use AI to do this, right? Which is how you can use AI to actually quantitatively track, are your sellers identifying and quantifying a business pain with the customer? So this is Knode. Just very quickly at a super high level, what Knode does, we define what good looks like in terms of seller behaviors based on historical data. And you can think of that as being 20 to 30 specific behaviors that are occurring that you really want your sellers to execute. We then measure that against actual sales calls and customer interactions. And then we produce these reports that provide quantitative scores for how the sellers are doing on each of those behaviors. So I'm going to quickly click into me. This is Ricardo Pellegrini. This is data from over the course of November 2nd to November 9th. I have an overall performance score of 77%. And what you can see here is we've used AI to basically map out these behaviors, map out an execution rate, which is the percentage of calls on which the behavior was executed, and most importantly, list each of the calls and say, all right, this behavior was successfully executed here, partially executed here, or not executed here. Now, of course, to make sure it aligns with the demo, we have identify and quantify a core business pain right up front, right? And this is a great example of how we have of how we would grade this. So in this instance, we have an execution rate of 90%. I have this call with Acme Inc. We have this behavior was successfully executed. Not only do I see that it was successfully executed, and I obviously get the list of the behavior, but I see the reasoning behind why we identified it successfully. So here in this instance, the seller, this is a demo based on fictitious data of an AI trucking software company, but it's one that closely maps hopefully to a lot of use cases for anyone that has cost saving on their mind in terms of selling to customers. So we are successfully identifying fuel costs of $180K per month as the primary pain at the customer, quantified at 35% of operating costs versus 28% previously. So the seller did this with the customer, and we have the evidence from the specific parts of the transcript. So we're spending about $180,000 a month on fuel. This is live from the actual customer transcript. And then we have the rubric criteria for how this was marked successfully executed, if it would have been marked partially executed or not executed. In this instance, it was marked successfully executed because the seller, again, got to not only what the pain was, which was fuel costs, but they quantified the pain as a percentage of operating costs. So imagine if you could snap your fingers and have every seller selling like this, as opposed to doing what we call feature-based selling, which is, hey, here's our product, here's what it does, here's the value you should get out of it. Instead, it's embedding with the customer, understanding their business pain, and actually putting a number on it, because that builds the foundation for your ROI case. So I will pause there. That is, if I had to say one behavior in particular that differentiates top sellers from lower performing sellers, this identify and quantify the business pain is the one empirically we have seen have the biggest impact. So that's conversion rate. We have a quick case study on how we were able to bump win rates by 25% using techniques like that, which I won't get into too much, but if anyone has questions, obviously, please feel free to to ping in the chat. So we want to make this a little bit interactive. We're, a bit of the ways through. Would love to hear from folks. What is your biggest challenge with conversion rate today? Want to make sure we address these. So folks, obviously feel free to message or Q&A in the chat. A few common ones we hear from folks are 1, poor discovery, 2, feature selling as opposed to value-based selling, 3, lack of product market fit, 4, deals dragging. Yeah. All right. I see we got some snarky jokes about Harvard, which is great. Always love those. And any others?
Yeah, I was just saying your 77 was on a curve, so it's more like an A-.
Yeah. All right. So Erica, I see you're a startup, so it's a bit of a deal dragging and a bit of finding PMF. Yep. So definitely see that. And Erica, one of the things to always look for is how can I get my data set quantitative around that PMF? Like which things are customers reacting to positively, poorly, et cetera. Hearing a lot on deals dragging, which we'll get to in a second, especially when it comes to sales cycle time and how we reduce that. We talked a little bit already about negative impact and how you can use that to press on timelines. So yeah, I see Steve. Yep, deals dragging. Matt, same thing. Awesome. All right, Carmen, should we move on to average deal size, or do we want to?
Yeah, let's do deal size. This is an important one. This is one where it's a little bit tricky. I would say that, depending on where you sit in the org, you have a great degree of control of this or you don't. So typically we'd look at deal size at a segment level. So just kind of high level, it's, you have SMB, you have mid-market, you have enterprise, you might have global accounts, you can have verticals across those segments as well. You can do it at a geo level. There's a number of ways you can do it. I think that the idea here is, like, let's say you're a sales leader and you're in a mid-market segment. You're in, I don't know, I'm just going to pick the Nordics. Don't know why I'm picking Europe, but we're in Scandinavia today. Let's say your min-max of deal sizes is, let's say it's 50K to 150K. That's a pretty big spread. And you might say, well, is that reasonable? And yes, it is. And the reason that it's reasonable is because oftentimes when companies segment, they have to have a very big spread for your SMB and your mid-market, simply because you'd have to have too much headcount to support a tighter spread. Where you see a very tight spread is generally at the enterprise level. So what that means is, how do you increase average deal size? Well, you can do it in a number of ways, right? You can do it by prospecting within a book of accounts, within a territory, having a better understanding of, who your ideal customer is. Social selling is a number of ways that we see this, but that might not always be feasible. And depending on what industry you're in, you might be called an account executive, but in reality, you're just sort of managing a book of business. So you're most likely a relationship manager that has a hunting motion and a farming motion. And if that's the case, which is the case for a lot of tech companies, whether you're in SaaS or media, what ends up happening? Okay, I have a book of 100 accounts. Generally 10 of them are going to, get me to 85, 90% of my quota. So you don't necessarily have the luxury of really going in and kind of saying, okay, is there something out there where I can get a different deal size with that might be higher than my average? So in this case, where we see uplift in average deal size, and I'm assuming, Ricardo, this is where you're going to go too, is the transition from sort of the feature-based selling, the demo-based selling. We've all been on them. I was on one last week. I get into a demo and the person's just literally telling me what it does. And I'm like, in my email to you, I already told you that I know what it does, right? And so it's just sort of like not necessarily doing discovery. It's getting on a call and just spending 10 minutes talking about the company, about the roadmap, about the product, about the features, and then saying, so does this solve your problem, right? And that's we've seen this time and time again, where when you lead with what's your objective, what's your problem, what are you trying to solve for, you generally see an uplift in this. That being said, very hard to coach to that, to change that behavior when you're a first line manager with a span of control of 12 reps, each rep has 200 accounts, you need some guidance, right? You can't focus on that all the time. And that's where, the tech comes into play. So Ricardo, I'll turn it back to you to walk through the interface. You're on mute. Famous last words.
Excellent. All right. No IT difficulties here. So on average deal size, this is one where it gets very tactical, right? Right now, especially given the environment, there tends to be significant pressure on pricing. So whether that's ACVs, ASPs, take your pick on whatever pricing amount. These are 3 concrete tips that we've seen in our data that really work to justify your pricing and make sure you're preserving your margins for your company. So first one is ROI data gathering, right? This is the groundwork. This is cleaning your plate. What I always recommend to folks is to know what your company's simple ROI calculation is. So on a first call, you should be able to ask the customer for 2 or 3 data points that they should have off the top of their head, or you can make assumptions, and be able to tell them very quickly, okay, this is what an ROI would look like for a company of your size with these characteristics. Would it be interesting to take the conversation a step further? So that ROI data gathering, and for us, it's very straightforward. We show an ROI slide that is all about number of sellers, assumption on how many sellers we're going to improve, by what percentage are they going to improve, and then what is their actual quota per year. Multiplying those 3 things gets us to an actual dollar value that creates the numerator for our ROI calculation. I'll show you what that slide looks like in a second on our side. So that's part 1. Part 2 is negotiating, part 2 is, and this is a really, really great technique, edit live with your customer. I'm gonna hop out here for a second and show you guys an example of an ROI calculation that we did with a specific customer. And it's in particular, we literally sat down with them on a call, pulled out this spreadsheet and said, all right, here's your ROI calculation. How many sellers do you think we're going to improve, right? And we took a specific percentage of reps. What is the percent improvement? What is the average quota per rep? So in this instance, 4 reps improving by 6%, pretty conservative. And the average quota per rep of $1 million gets you to $240,000 of incremental top line, right? So this spreadsheet is, again, very simple, straightforward, but we literally spend 30 minutes on a call going through it, making sure the customer is aligned with it. Here, we also have a ramp acceleration value prop, where basically we're saying, okay, if you take rep 2 with a slower ramp and rep 1 where you accelerate them by 1 month, what is the difference per rep in actual financial impact over the course of that year? Again, pretty straightforward, right? A rep accelerates faster, they're going to bump their quota, or they're going to get much closer to their quota over the course of the year relative to a rep that is slower. So again, we take this 250,000, which is the impact of ramp acceleration, 240,000, which is the impact of rep improvement. We add those 2 together, divide it by our cost for this particular customer, which was 60,000, and we get an ROI of 8.2x. I'm showing you this because this is the foundation for justifying your price later on when you are presenting to the CFO. And that's something that's really powerful. I'm happy to share this spreadsheet, by the way, for quick context. What this looks like in a CFO presentation and presentation to the broader team is, hey, here's an example ROI math. Here's the quota per AE. Here's the assumed improvement. And again, this is a fictitious company, just to be clear. This is what the ROI would look like based on this calculation. Now, you can get this calculation on that first call, but if you get people to align on it, that sets the stage for your pricing to be justified. And again, this is a single seller that we're improving. We then have a broader ROI math case that we improve over here. And again, this shows great ROI. So those are 2 very concrete tips in terms of how to gather data when you're thinking about ROI. I'll go ahead and share my screen back. And then last key things on negotiation techniques. Always try to confirm if the customer is going with your solution first before you get into pricing negotiations. This is a really important one that I see folks mess up quite a bit, especially if you're selling software. Often the difference between one solution and another, it's not actually based on price. People don't care that much because the impact it's going to have is so large. If it's a more commoditized offering, maybe it is, but in general, you can do the groundwork to make sure the customer likes your solution more. and they understand why your ROI is better before you get into, price comparison, et cetera. So figuring that out first is a huge deal. And then always discuss price in the context of ROI. This is another very concrete one. You should always be saying something like, hey, well, look, relative to a savings of $1.6 million, our solution has a cost of $500,000, producing an producing a 2.8x ROI in a conservative case. If you train your sellers to say sentences like that whenever someone asks about price, it becomes much less of a blocker as compared to people saying, hey, how do you guys compare to Salesforce, or how do you guys compare to some other solution that is out there in the market? Because that's not the comparison that you want folks to be making. And then the last thing is cross-sell, upsell in terms of deal size. A common complaint we hear from folks is, I want to make sure that my sellers are selling our new products and selling all of our products. And in addition to that, make sure they're doing it correctly. Using AI to monitor that is a great way to get some pretty quick lift for your org in terms of your average deal size with customers. That's it on average deal size. We'll come back a little bit more later, but speed to close. Carmen, over to you.
Speed to close. This one is, I think this one is probably the most challenging to coach to. Admittedly, running a consulting firm, we struggle with this too. It is not an easy thing to get right. I think what's, on speed to close, I think what's really important here, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, if you influence these variables, your company will make more money, but not all of them you can influence. Not all of them you should put the time, effort, resources into influencing, because there's trade-offs, right? You might be able to move the needle, as they say, 1 point or 2 points on speed to close, and that order of magnitude, right, may be such that it would offset a 10-point lift in win rate, right, as a high-level example. So I do think it is important that, as we're coming to the last variable here, as you're doing this, to be very thoughtful about, just because you can make incremental improvements, sometimes with what is statistically significant doesn't have much impact in reality. And so I think I say that because we find that speed to close is one of the more challenging ones to get right, because again, even if you have the best rep, even if you have everything else right, you're still relying on a procurement team, a team of internal people to move it along the finish line. I also, one other note I want to add here, when you're looking at the data to analyze this, it is pretty important to figure out, when do you consider something closed? Sometimes with clients, it's they move it into a closed one, but then there's this sort of transitional state, right, between hey, we have a verbal, but then there's all the language back and forth. So it might be, you might define speed to close as that verbal stage and not necessarily that signature stage, or you might define it as a signature stage. So I think it is important to figure out, when you're trying to drive that behavior, do we want to drive the behavior to the verbal? Do we want to drive the behavior to the time that it's signed? If you look at the data and you say 99% of every verbal ends up having a signature, then probably doesn't really make sense to over-index, on the stage from verbal to signature. So I know it might sound nuanced, but it is important to really understand the data, the leakage, the pipeline before you go into it. I would say on the other thing on speed to close is, this one, it depends on, of course, the segment. So if you have an enterprise segment, it's going to be a little bit longer than if you have an SMB segment. And then, of course, if you have a government segment, excuse me. But the one thing I do want to call out here is that the operational side of this is what we find on a process perspective. Having a playbook on how to run this generally is very difficult at a mid-market or an SMB level. So Ricardo, I'd be curious, when you're working with potential clients or current clients, where do you see differences in speed to close for, say, an SMB or mid-market versus an enterprise? And how does that show up differently in how managers can use this? Yeah. Or can use Knode, rather?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we think about speed to close, they're sort of the process components, and those are particularly important when you are thinking about higher velocity sales, right? A small change in the way you are conducting a call, like for example, requesting a follow-up call while you're on the current call. One of the most common behaviors that sellers aren't tracking and managers aren't tracking, but makes a massive impact on getting you from point A to point B in the sales cycle, right? So if I say, hey, Carmen, it was great chatting today. Can we block out 30 minutes next week? Let's open up our calendars right now, just to see when works. That alone can have, a double-digit impact on your ability to go from stage 1 to stage 2 in a sales process. So again, for those higher velocity ones, that's really critically important. For the enterprise ones, it is all about, again, going back and figuring out, okay, I have this ROI data. How do I make this ROI data important to decision makers that really matter, right? Because what's going to happen is you'll have that initial meeting with, for us, it's often either a VP of sales or maybe someone on the RevOps side, and then they'll have to go to another decision maker to try and get buy-in. So if you can have that business case really nailed and press on the cost of inaction, which again is similar to building a negative impact case, but it's building a negative impact case specific locally and then exploring the ripple effects broadly for the business. If you can do that with the customer and put numbers to it, it gives them a really easy one-pager slide that they can go to folks on their team with and say, hey, I can move this metric. That tends to work really well on the enterprise side. Obviously, if you're doing, 2 to 3 call closes, maybe it's not as necessary, but those are, I would say, some of the key differences. The other thing is, and this is a very common technique that we see a lot of sellers fail to ask about, is tying the sales cycle to a specific date at the customer, right? This is something that, in particular, saying, all right, great, do you have an upcoming sales kickoff that we need to be ready for? When is your next quarter's board meeting? Would it be great if we were able to show some progress or movement in the metric in advance of that? Let's target that as a date for you. If you can frame the date in your customer's language, that is going to increase their urgency and make sure that you don't miss the window, because the common adage is time kills all deals, and this is definitely true. In the history of Knode, we've had one customer churn from a pilot, and the only reason that they churned was because the entire sales team quit the week before we were actually supposed to convert. And again, we've been working with them for 4 months. It was great, but I didn't press enough to get the deal done. That was an instance where you had an external variable just come in and completely kill things. So the way you can avoid that, again, is getting to those specific dates with your customers, really setting out a map to get there. And that is a behavior that you can really track with AI. In particular in particular, we find with new sellers, this is something that makes a particularly big impact as they are ramping. So that's a bit on speed to close. And again, just to harp on this a little bit more, all of these things, again, whether it's Knode or some other product, the key thing here is to be able to track the behaviors that your sellers are doing, right? So in this particular instance, we talked about building a negative impact case and exploring the ripple effects by pressing on that pain, asking a question, making sure your sellers are asking questions like, what headaches have the problems that you talked about, customer? To what extent do they create problems for you in your business? Make sure that they're doing it, make sure that this is fully tracked. And here, for example, in this instance, the customer said, honestly, if we don't solve this, we'll probably have to raise our rates significantly, which could price us out of some contracts, or we'd have to cut routes, which means also having layoffs. So that's a great example of where you have a particular thing, you're getting it to the underlying negative impact for the particular customer, and then making it a business level problem, not just a local problem to drive urgency. So that's a little bit on conversion rate, on speed to close. Again, if folks have any questions on any of these behaviors, we are happy to share these. So please, don't hesitate to reach out. We find that, even if you're not using AI, some of the things that Carmen's talking about, plus these behaviors, can make a big difference for your organization.
Yep. And with that, the good news is you don't have to remember all those, right, Rick? I'm stealing your thunder. We have
no. Sorry, I completely forgot that I'm supposed to talk about this. So this is we're going to give you guys 2 assets here, or a couple of assets. The first one is this sales behavior checklist. So we just went through win rate the behaviors that really matter there, identify and quantify the core business pain, and building a negative impact case, as well as specific questions that you can have your sellers asking for each of those. So again, we've got win rate here, deal size, ROI data gathering and negotiation techniques, cross-sell, upsell, and then speed to close, press on the cost of an action, tying the purchase to a relevant date. We have specific questions here that you are free to take and use with your existing organizations. I hope that those are helpful. One last thing, I mean, we talked about this already, but these questions are great and they're very helpful, but you want to make sure that you are actually measuring and coaching these behaviors based on real data. It is very easy to have high-level conversations to say, hey, I would need you to do better discovery. I need you to get to the customer's pain and give that. Every seller could use that feedback the same way everybody could use work out more, eat more vegetables, etc. Right? When it's high level, it doesn't matter. Being able to actually measure these is often the difference between top performing sales orgs and lower performing sales orgs. So definitely place an emphasis on that with your company. And now, Carmen, I'm going to turn it back over to you with the sales velocity checklist.
Yeah, so very much in a similar context. It's kind of a self-assessment tool, but I think you can also use it just as like any other checklist, right? Just making sure that you've covered everything, you have everything. I wouldn't over-index on the scoring. Pretty classic. Red, yellow, green. But we look at again for each of the levers, we have it broken down into kind of the strategic alignment, the operational side, the systems and tools, and you can just kind of, I won't read through them. We'll send this out to everyone so you'll be able to have this. And then I think there's a integration checklist as well. So again, just other things that may not be in terms of win rate. So you look at the behaviors, you look at those things. They may not themselves be an issue, but there might be other horizontal or kind of cross-functional things that dive into that or integrate into that are causing those failures. So the way that I would look at this is sometimes just knowing what question to ask is really all you need. And that's really what this checklist and assessment is meant to be. It's meant to say hey, these are all the things when you're doing a diagnostic that you should maybe look at to make sure that it's not causing an issue or it's preventing you from amplifying or being successful. Yep. And then just we wouldn't be consultants if we didn't give you some kind of tool that you can print out and fill out yourself. Again, it's just your own scorecard. However you want to use this. I think the takeaway is there's a lot of good items in there in terms of being able to self-assess and self-diagnose, and then overlaying that with the behavioral side of things is how I would recommend using this. Cool. All right. I think we're pretty good. We have 10 minutes left, and we wanted to keep 10 minutes for questions. So, any questions from the group? Anything specific in general? Turn it over to the audience.
All right, we have one from Matt. What are your favorite AI enablements? I assume you mean besides Knode, obviously, because a little biased opinion over here, at least on my side. But Carmen, what have you seen? I'll also chime in with a few.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if what you mean on enablements, I mean, I'll go all the way from the very mundane to some of the better ones. I love. I know this is gonna sound terrible, but I love Grammarly as a little AI add-in. It does make a difference, when you're doing even so I come from Microsoft, specifically LinkedIn, and we had Copilot, and Copilot was great, but it has this way of talking that isn't natural. So as an example, when you sign off, it's you'd say something like, feel free to reach out with any questions, but then you always get the thing where it says, please feel free to reach out with any questions. And so it's just, sometimes you use it, sometimes you don't, but that's one that I really like. I would say more on an enterprise level. Other ones that I use, which I don't think they directly compete with you, Ricardo, or you guys are maybe complementary. I do think Clary has some good tech as well as Gong in terms of conversational intelligence. I think the thing with those, and really what you solve for, is these are embedded into the technology where this is meant to be, and I don't want to speak for Knode, but it's meant to be more of a tool that captures this sort of real time and it's actionable as opposed to reporting based. So I think that's something that, to me stands out about Knode. But yeah, those would be the couple on my end.
Yeah. And I'll echo those as well. I think the things where we've seen the most success so far, so like customer success and support bots, sometimes revenue leaders own that. Those are a great use case for these LLMs where you have a discrete set of things that you want responded to, but in natural language. A lot of those customer support chatbots, absolutely fantastic. On the sales side, it's a little bit trickier. In my opinion, I don't see a world where AI SDRs or really AI account executives are going to be taking a ton of jobs anytime soon. We see it a little bit, but not so much. So overall, you better have a conversational intelligence tool for your sales team. And again, we're not a call recorder. We hook into all of these, so we're very complementary with Gong, Clarity, some of the Sales Loft, et cetera. I would broadly say, make sure you have a conversational intelligence tool. Make sure on the support side, any tickets or any issues that can be handled by AI should be handled by AI, because that frees up your account managers, especially to focus on growing existing revenue. So, and then Carmen just mentioned Clay. Clay is the center of the universe right now when it comes to data enrichment and go to market. It's what all the cool kids are using, and I think for pretty good reason. That's one where, from an outbound perspective and just really connecting up data sources, it's it's hard to beat right now.
Yeah. There is a learning curve with it, but once you embed it into your tech stack, it's pretty amazing what you can do with it, and not just for outbound either, right? It's got other applications.
100%. All right, we got another one from Matt. What is the biggest aha moment that people's minds get blown in your products when demoing? I don't know, Carmen, if you guys have a biggest aha moment for you guys with customers. For us, it tends to be this notion of, wait, I can really just hand you a playbook, snap my fingers, and get all of this data on exactly what's going on with my sellers and which ones need to improve and in what ways in a data-driven fashion. And I can do that with 15 minutes of work. That's like, that is where folks typically like working with us. That's the power of AI, of course. And I'm sure you guys have some other, have some aha moments with your customers that where you've had big breakthroughs as well.
Yeah, I would say that anytime you can have tech that overlays or software that overlays the tech stack, that's embedded into it, that enriches it, enhances it. That's always a great aha moment. I know it sounds boring, but we did a study where there was, I forget what it was, but the average seller has something like 27 logins. All the tools that you can think of, and so just another tool becomes just that, another tool, right? And it's something that, if it's not pushed down from the leadership level, if it's not part of the everyday fabric of how you go to market and what your sales team uses and does, what your first line managers do, then it's just that. It's another tool, it's shelfware, it ends up churning. And so I think for me, those, like with clients, the aha moment is, if you're going to use this and it's going to be successful, it needs to be part of the fabric. So you have to wake up. The analogy that we use is, you want your sales leaders to wake up every day and the first thing they think about before they get ready is, I have to check Knode. Like that is the sort of goal. And to me, that's the aha moment, because it may seem obvious, but when we talk to clients, it's not. It's just, oh yeah, this is a great tool. We'll buy it, and we'll do the implementation. We'll train people on it, and then it never realizes its full value. So, it's not as fun as Ricardo's, but it's generally one that we, being an implementation and execution firm, it's one that we over-index on.
Awesome. What would you say? Whether it's using AI or something else, what are the biggest problem? Like, on average, what's the biggest problem when you walk to a client and you're evaluating things? What's the biggest problem that most folks need to solve for their sales organizations? We talked about a lot of them, but like, what's the one that's most common where you're like, yep, this is most frequent?
I know it's cliche, but it truly is revenue solves all problems. I would say, of the 4 levers that we talked about today, the focus is almost always on pipeline, right? Because it has to be. You can say, and none of this is necessarily surprising to sell. Like, yeah, obviously, let's get bigger deals. Let's close more of them. Let's close them faster. Excuse me. But by far and away, it's just deals. It's in the pipeline, right? And for the organizations that don't have that problem, like we have a client right now where they don't necessarily have that problem. Their biggest problem is they can't figure out how to route deals the right way, right? And because they can't figure out to route them the right way, they have deals that have high deal value size in terms of like the lead scoring, but very long time to close, very low close rate. In some cases, 10x less a close rate than a smaller value deal, right? And so it just depends, but there's always that nuance. But I would say, without a doubt, it's always leads in the pipeline is probably the number one challenge that most companies have.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I mean, cost of lead gen getting more and more expensive over time. So, as I think, you started off the conversation with, you better be crisp on your ICP if you want to actually get the right folks in the door and the right deals to close. And then obviously that puts even more pressure on the at-bats that you do get with the leads you see. So,
and another use case that I don't think we spoke about, but for those of you, that have been in the enterprise space, we talk about, if you think about the revenue motions, there's obviously new business, there's managing churn, and then there's expansion. But expansion oftentimes is sort of obfuscated by just the word expansion. But when you really drill it down, there's a number of use cases. So one could be you more seats, right? Or more tokens or increased price. It could be, though, oftentimes in an enterprise setting, hey, I manage a book of business. That book of business has 60 accounts, right? Well, if I have IBM, let's say, as one of them, well, IBM is just IBM. That's the parent level. You might have multiple levels of business at the child level. Those child level accounts have multiple levels of business. Those all have buying centers, right? And like with Microsoft, as a better example, you have, say, Azure, you have Xbox, you have LinkedIn. Those are child accounts. Within LinkedIn, there's multiple, sub accounts or grandchild accounts. So I do think when we talk about expansion, one of the things that often comes up is, hey, I can't there is nowhere to move in an enterprise or mid-market center. Like lead gen means something different in those segments. So I think it's also probably, when we think about improving revenue, those use cases around win rate, around speed, and around deal size become even more important in a mid-market or a revenue or an enterprise segment, because that your lead gen is very different than your SME segment. And so that is also where we see this being particularly helpful, right? Is coaching sellers on how to improve that and how to sell into, different accounts that they manage.
All right. Well, I see we are ending in 40 seconds. We are almost at time. I guess, Quang, any parting words for the crew?
No, outside of thank you everyone for your time. And thank you, Ricky and Carmen, for your insights.
Awesome.
All right.
Great seeing everybody.
Next time. Cheers, y'all.
Take
Thanks
care.
all.
Bye.